Imagine picking up Stalker 2 today and feeling like the game has finally reached the level everyone dreamed of. That's exactly the feeling with Update 1.7. It not only solves several old problems, but also changes how the zone reacts to you, how you survive, and even how each expedition feels more tense and unpredictable. Today we're going to dissect everything that came in this patch, show in practice why so many people already consider this the best update of all, and what really changes in your experience when you return to the zone after it. I'm Matthew, and the video is about to start. This change of life transforms the zone into something much more alive and unpredictable, almost as if the game were playing against you even when you just want to go from A to B. Instead of being a static scenario, the factions start to breathe, fight, lose, and gain space without asking your permission, and this completely changes the exploration climate. The territorial control thing is what messes with your head the most. Knowing that an area you cleared can be dominated by another faction again, if you simply ignore it for a few hours, creates a constant feeling of instability. You're no longer just clearing enemy camps. You're interfering in a moving board, where each ambush, each base taken, can open a safer route or turn a shortcut into a total death zone. It gives you the feeling that if you get too attached to a favorite route, the zone will punish you. The dispute of points of interest makes each trip to a checkpoint feel like Russian roulette. Places that previously seemed like just landmarks on the map can now be under control of a totally different group when you return, or even taken over by mutants who took advantage of the chaos to occupy the space. This changes the navigation flow by force. You find yourself planning alternative routes, watching shootouts from a distance, and deciding whether it's worth getting involved or just staying there like a vulture, waiting for the last body to fall to loot everything. The fact that the main hubs are left out of this war helps a lot to maintain a minimum of sanity. These stable points become almost islands of mental security in the middle of a map that can change hands all the time. So returning to a hub after crossing war zones gives a real sense of returning to civilization, even if it's a rotten and decadent civilization like the zones. It's that place where you take a deep breath, organize your inventory, sell scrap, and psychologically prepare to dive back into the chaos. Overall, this expansion of A-Life and the faction wars pulls Stalker too much more towards the zone's simulator side than just an FPS with a story. You start playing not only against specific enemies, but against an entire ecosystem that reacts, reorganizes, and sometimes simply doesn't give a damn about your existence and continues waging its own wars while you try to survive in the middle of it all. It's the kind of change that not only increases replayability, but also leaves each walk in the zone with that weight of, okay, what happened here while I wasn't looking? This part of Update 1.7 is the kind of improvement that doesn't appear in trailers, but completely changes how the game feels in your hands. When the CPU stops becoming a bottleneck every time the screen fills with NPCs, physics, and scripts, Stalker 2 stops looking like a heavy and poorly optimized game and starts to look like a demanding game, but fair to your hardware. It's the difference between thinking my PC is weak and realizing that, in fact, the code is now letting the processor and video card work where it really matters. The frame time improvement is where the magic happens in practice, because it's no use showing high FPS on the counter if the screen is micro-stuttering with every step. With more stable frame pacing, those annoying stutters in dense areas, with lots of geometry, dynamic lighting, and moving NPCs, become much less frequent, and this changes the feeling of fluidity even when the FPS doesn't increase that much. It's the kind of adjustment that makes you catch yourself thinking, wow, this is much more enjoyable control without even knowing exactly why. On the PC, another cool part is seeing the game finally making better use of GPU and CPU at the same time, instead of leaving the video card yawning while the CPU suffers. Optimization of streaming assets, lighting, and heavy map structures means fewer usage spikes when you turn the camera quickly or enter a new area. So the game stops giving those classic Unreal stutters when it loads something out of nowhere. For those who play on simpler SSDs or even on consoles, this translates into a much more consistent experience, without that feeling of performance always breaks here. The part about simulating fabrics, lighting, and the like seems like a visual detail, but it has a direct impact on performance and immersion. When the game optimizes cloth, meshes, and animations, it means less unnecessary calculation with things you barely notice. Free up resources for what really matters. AI, physics, shooting, explosion, all that chaos of the zone happening around. The result is that you continue with a beautiful visual and a dense zone, but without paying with stutter every time the wind blows on half a dozen coats and flags at the same time. In the end, this optimization of CPU and frame times in 1.7 is the kind of update that makes you want to replay or continue a save that you had abandoned due to technical frustration. When the game stops fighting against the player at the performance level, there's room for it to shine in what really matters in Stalker: atmosphere, tension, nervous shooting, and that constant fear of turning the corner. It's as if the zone continues as cruel as before, but at least now who is no longer sabotaging your experience is the game engine. This stealth review of 1.7 is a step that finally makes the game stop treating stealth as a broken extra and start to see it as a real pillar of gameplay. The zone has always looked like the perfect place to sneak, observe, and attack at the right time, but the AI's behavior didn't always accompany this fantasy. Now the game starts to align what you see on the screen with what the system really understands. This, in itself, already changes the way you want to approach each encounter. The adjustment in the AI detection code means that stealth has become less a lottery and more of a logic. Distance, angle, light, noise, and time count much more than before. When you make a mistake, it starts to become clear why. You stood up too much, got too close, made noise at the wrong time, were exposed in the silhouette, instead of that feeling of, I did everything right, and the game decided to see me anyway. This makes experimenting with alternative routes and stealth strategies much more enjoyable, because you feel like you're learning a system, not fighting with it. Visual occlusion by tall vegetation is, perhaps, the most enjoyable part of this package. Grass, reeds, and bushes stop being just graphic decoration and become gameplay tools. If you're crouched in the bush with good distance, the enemies really have difficulty in nailing your position, and the time they take to detect you becomes a resource that you use in your favor. Walking through swamps and fields now is another climate. You read the terrain, choose routes through the green, observe patrols, and advance like a predator and not just as a guy running from cover to cover. The reduction in the accuracy of shots through bushes directly attacks that classic frustration of taking surgical shots from an enemy who should barely see you. They can still suspect shoot in the smoke and try to suppress you, but with a penalty in the aim when there is no clear line of sight, the behavior becomes much more human. More wrong shots, more spray, more opportunity to change position without being melted by magic bullets crossing leaves. This makes the shooting exchanges in areas full of vegetation much more dramatic and fair, because both you and the AI start to use a scenario instead of pretending that the bush doesn't exist. As a whole, this stealth review makes Stalker 2 better embrace the fantasy of being a silent hunter in the zone, instead of pushing you all the time to the chaos of weapon in hand. Now it makes sense to observe from afar, enter under the vegetation, choose targets, avoid unnecessary combats, and use the noise of other confrontations to infiltrate, because the system finally rewards this style of play. And, perhaps the most important, when everything goes wrong and the situation collapses, you feel that it was a choice or mistake of yours, not a dirty trick of the AI with X-ray vision. These two new modes in 1.7 directly mess with the way you relate to the zone. They stop being just difficulty sliders and become choices of game philosophy. Instead of just thinking about how much damage you take or give, you start to decide how much control you are willing to give up over your own progress in exchange for tension and immersion. It's the kind of change that turns each exit from a hub into a commitment. If it goes wrong, there's no savior F5. Expedition mode is basically the game looking at your face and asking, are you sure you want to leave the hub like that? Without free manual saving, you start to depend only on autosaves when leaving a safe hub or at specific mission moments, which makes any walk to an objective seem like a small expedition even with weight and planning. You think about ammunition, medical kit, weaponware, time of day, because you know that if you underestimate the zone and die on the way back, all that progress simply evaporates. The coolest thing about Expedition is that it's not stuck only to maximum suffering. It's a modifier that you can attach to any difficulty. This opens space for very different experiences, like playing on normal, but with restricted saving, or on veteran with Expedition on, balancing more fair combat with very high survival tension. For those who enjoy narrative and exploration, but want that cold in the belly of possibly losing 40 minutes of progress for a stupid decision, this mode fits like a glove. The master difficulty is another level of psychological commitment. It's not just a slider. It's a campaign choice that you make on the initial screen and know that will hurt. The damage is brutal. The enemies and anomalies punish any slip. Resources are much scarcer. Equipment wears out faster. And even needs like radiation, hunger, and fatigue weigh much more in your routine. It's the kind of mode in which a tactical error is not, I lost a little life. It's ready. I threw away half an hour of game. And then comes the final evil. In Master, the expedition comes on by default. No turning off save restriction in the middle of the way. No relieving when things start to get too tight. If you chose Master, you also chose to live with limited saving from beginning to the end of the campaign. This makes each encounter, each incursion in a new area, and each return a hub seem like a mini survival story. And that's why, for those who like this kind of good suffering, this Master plus Expedition combo is practically the definitive way to play Stalker 2. This change in the combat AI of 1.7 is the kind of adjustment that makes each encounter in the zone seem less like shooting at bots and more like a desperate confrontation between people who want to survive as much as you do. The behavior tree of the NPCs became smarter, with better logic to decide when to advance, hold position, retreat, or try to surround you. So the combat stops being just reflex and starts to require reading the situation all the time. The preservation part changes the climate of the shootout a lot, because the enemy now knows when to fall out when he realizes that the chances of survival are bad. Seeing a bandit or a soldier retreating, trying to break line of sight, retreating to cover, or running for reinforcement passes a much more organic feeling, almost of real fear on the other side of the site. This also breaks a feeling that every NPC is suicidal and forces you to decide. Chase who fled and expose yourself more, or hold position and accept that that guy can reappear later, healed and more dangerous. When flanking comes in, the game basically sends a message. Standing still in the same cover until everything is over is no longer a safe option. The AI starts to use the scenarios better, advancing to the sides, trying to get an angle where your protection doesn't work so well, and sometimes even using grenade or suppression fire to get you out of a perfect hole. This generates those moments of good panic in which you realize that you're not just shooting at targets, but being hunted by a group that talks, spreads, and tries to disassemble you in parts. The detail of the engagement distance based on a weapon is the touch that makes everything seem more tactical without needing a complicated interface. Enemy with shotgun wants to stick to you. Force short-range combat. Use corridor, door, corner, wall. Already guy with rifle, DMR, or sniper tend to hold further away, take advantage of straight line, and lock you in open field, where you're the one who has to run after cover. Just by looking at the armament of the guys, you already start to predict what kind of behavior to expect. And this transforms shooting into game reading, not just reaction to red marker on the screen. In the end, these adjustments of preservation, flanking, and positioning by weapon leave each combat with its own identity, almost as if the zone was all the time testing your ability to adapt. You start to move more, use terrain with intelligence, choose better when to buy a fight and when to get out, because now the NPCs are playing for real against you. It's the kind of change that not only makes the combat more difficult, but more fair and more immersive. In that way in which, when everything goes wrong, the feeling is that you slipped, not that the AI cheated. The reformulation of the stamina system in the 1.7 update of Stalker 2 brings a novelty that really makes a difference in the fluidity of movement and the tension of survival. Before, when your stamina bar reached 0, you simply stopped running, which created that feeling of locking that broke the rhythm and realism. Now, with the new type of sprint activated when the stamina runs out, you continue moving, but with a reduced speed and with an animation that really shows the character's wear. This gave me a much more authentic feeling of exhaustion, without losing the urgency of escaping or repositioning quickly in combat or exploration situations. The adjustment makes the experience more fluid, because now running to the limit and then having to die in place is not the only option, which avoids frustrations and maintains immersion. This new tired sprint has its own rhythm, which sends a message that your character is at the limit, but is still able to move forward, generating that real tension of knowing that if you abuse too much, you will end up being totally vulnerable. It is a change that affects not only the gameplay, but also the silent narrative of survival in the zone, where each step counts and there is no room for rest to recharge stamina in the middle of a shootout. This also adds an extra layer of planning when moving around the map. You start to consider not only where to run, but when to hold your breath, so you don't end up in the tired sprint at the wrong time. This fine management of stamina creates that kind of tension that scares and makes the shootouts more tense, because losing the rhythm of movement can be fatal. And even when you are in that costly race, the change in the animation helps to visualize the wear and prepares you psychologically for the moment when you need to slow down to recover breath. Another point that is worth highlighting is how this change affects the combat and exploration in a zone where there is always something there around the corner, and the speed can be the difference between life and death. The tired sprint is an elegant answer to prevent the player from feeling that he is being mechanical punishment when the stamina runs out. Instead, it creates a more organic and realistic game space where fatigue affects your performance, but does not leave you hostage to the system. This offers more tactical options, leaving the encounters less predictable and the escapes or advances with more nuances. Overall, this reformulation of the stamina system is one of those subtle but profound improvements that increase the immersion and tension in the survival of the zone. It breathes authenticity in the character's movement, creating a much more true feeling of the weight and effort that it would be to move in the middle of a hostile environment like the one of Stalker 2. This change leaves the gameplay more mature and polished, and for those who like the game not only for the action but for the climate, it is a great step in the right direction. This correction to enemies spawning in Stalker 2's 1.7 update was more than necessary to increase immersion and avoid the old shock that many felt when NPCs abruptly appear in front of or behind them at totally unreal distances. It's frustrating and breaks attention when an enemy simply drops out of nowhere into your line of sight. So seeing that this logic has been improved makes combat feel much more natural and fair. Now, encounters have a much more believable timing, which helps maintain that constant pressure without feeling like the game is cheating you. On the visual side, the correction in vegetation rendering also has an impact that goes beyond aesthetics. Those oscillations, ghostings, and tremors in the foliage made it difficult to identify hidden enemies and ended up distracting, taking the focus away from exploration and increasing eye strain. With this improvement, visual clarity in forest areas has become much cleaner and more stable, making the environment more realistic and less frustrating, especially for those who use vegetation to their advantage in stealth. This improves both immersion and gameplay fluidity. Another thing that caught my attention is that correcting these issues is not just a technical adjustment, but a reaffirmation of the game's commitment to delivering a zone that feels alive, logical, and organic. Unrealistic spawning and visual bugs take the player out of that state of total immersion that Stalker seeks so much. Now that you see enemies appearing in believable places and vegetation acting naturally, you really feel like you're walking in a dangerous and unpredictable environment, and not in a game with programming flaws. These improvements in spawning and rendering, combined with other AI and system updates seen in 1.7, represent a very important advance in the relationship between player and zone. The zone is not just a combat stage, but a living organism that you need to understand and respect. Visual clarity helps you prepare better, and more organic spawning avoids those unfair surprises, making the game reward your planning and attention to detail instead of arbitrarily punishing you. Finally, I think these corrections are the kind of refinement that transforms a good experience into a great experience, especially for those who like to get lost in the atmosphere and tense realism of the Stalker universe. They are small steps that make all the difference in the long run, creating that feeling of a real zone where every encounter, every movement in the vegetation, and every approaching enemy pulls you into the story and the challenge.
I need cover!